There was a roar in the courtroom as the judge began to read the death sentence to Veronica Hillstay. She was accused of committing a heinous crime. The excited whispers of the crowd spread through the hall like a poisonous fog. The gazes of those present slid over the figure of the condemned girl. The judge looked down at Veronica from the height of his chair. His words about the defendant's final statement echoed throughout the courtroom. People held their breath, waiting for an answer. The girl raised her pale face. Her lips trembled from the last words that were hidden in the depths of her soul. The hall froze, waiting for her confession. Veronica fell silent mid-sentence. Heavy drops of rain fell on the girl from the gray sky. It seemed as if the heavens were mourning the fate of the villain. Her silence was abruptly broken by the presiding judge. He asked pointedly what the criminal wanted to say. The moisture left wet streaks on Veronica's pale face. A quiet smile touched her lips as her last words fell into the empty courtroom. The girl asked if love was a crime. Her voice trembled in the cool air. The prince, who had been silently watching, ground his teeth. Tears flowed from the brunette's eyes. Her confession was heard in the cold courtroom. Veronica simply loved the prince. All those present began to talk at once. There was a noise in the hall. The girl was accused of being shameless until the very end. They noted the absence of the count. They expressed the opinion that the man must have been shocked at how he had raised his only daughter. The chairman of the court waved his hand casually and ordered her to be taken away. The guards led the condemned woman out of the courtroom. In the end, the brunette wished the prince happiness. Already outside the courtroom, hidden from prying eyes, Veronica allowed herself a cold smile. Because the girl believed that she would be happier than him. The guard's voice ordered her to quickly climb into the cell. The man was rude and pushed the girl. The brunette fell to the floor. She looked angrily at the warden. The sound of footsteps echoed off the wooden floorboards. Veronica inquired with satisfaction about the quality of her performance in the courtroom. The gray-haired gentleman in the exquisite attire confirmed that everything was perfect. His cold gaze was directed at the girl. Veronica abruptly extended her hand and declared that in that case the terms of the contract were fulfilled. And now he had to pay. The girl called her interlocutor her father, but the count shook his head. His lips pressed into a thin line. He did not agree with her words. The girl smirked. Why was she acting so brazen? Because Veronica Hillstay didn't really exist. The quick steps of little feet could be heard in the darkness of the night. The child ran, clutching a loaf of bread tightly in his hands. Born in poverty, the baby did not even know who her father was. And the mother's debts led to the child being sold into the hands of strangers. The 10-year-old girl was in an unfamiliar living room. The woman was coldly assessing her new acquisition. She was interested in what Lacey could do. The stranger examined the child's face. Her assessment was cold. The baby possessed an attractiveness that could be useful in the future. The girl said that she was smart and good at many things. The woman was surprised and amazed by such words of the little girl. Although Lacey was shaking with fear, she continued. She asked not to use her just because of her face. She suggested considering other options. Madame laughed heartily. She admitted that the girl was something special. She asked if the little girl didn't know what they were doing here. The instructions were cold and clear. Leslie was to play a random witness to the crime. The girl silently adjusted her cap, hiding her eyes. No matter what role Leslie played, she had to play it perfectly. It could be the heir presumed dead, the groom's illegitimate child, the Marchioness's young maid. Unexpectedly, the young swindler's acting skills turned out to be amazing. There were many poisoners and corpse collectors, but the most popular was the actor. In the spacious living room, the veiled woman smiled meaningfully. She assured the elegant, expensively dressed man that he would not regret anything. And then one day, Madame informed Leslie that a strange request had come in. A man was looking for a girl who would become his adopted daughter for a few years. The girl didn't believe it. She asked Madame, no revenge, no deception. She was surprised. Was it really enough to just become his daughter? The lady answered in the affirmative, and admitted that the fee was like Leslie's payment for 10 years of work. Madame continued to tempt. The task seemed dubious, but Leslie had already given in to temptation. This money could go to pay off her mother's debt. The girl was dreaming. If she paid off the entire debt, she would never entertain anyone again. This would be her last role, and she would be free. The carriage with Leslie Veronica drove up to the wrought iron gates of the castle. The girl agreed to become an adopted daughter. Her goals for the next 6 years were clear. It is necessary to make the first prince a powerful heir to the throne, and the client will be able to put a noble lady on the throne. and then she will disappear. One of the conditions was that there should be no one in Weldon who knew our heroine. Her debut was delayed due to illness. But as soon as Veronica appeared, she immediately captured the attention of high society. At the ball, a prince approached her. The young man asked her to do him the honor of dancing the first dance with him. Veronica coquettishly responded with consent. Their hands touched. The prince looked at the charming young lady with admiration. Those present in the ballroom began to talk at once. They began to discuss their couple. The girl was happy. Everything was perfect. Everything was going according to plan. A gentle melody sounded in the hall. Couples slowly twirled in a dance. Veronica quietly confessed to the prince that she was ready to make her beloved king. And then a competitor appeared on the horizon. The count, just in time, found an angelic-looking girl who suited him. Veronica pretended to compete, but she was losing the fight for the first prince. And then, blinded by jealousy, our heroine decided to poison her rival. She added a few drops of poison to a glass of wine, and so the socialite became a villain. As planned, the plan failed, and the threat was eliminated. When rumors of what had happened reached the Earl's ears, the man clutched his head in horror. He was sorry that he had not been able to raise his daughter properly. The Earl of Hillsteel could do nothing to help. The brunette was arrested. She agreed to obey the law. She thought that was how the story ended. The windows of the house shone in the night darkness, cutting through the gloom with a warm light. A ringing voice broke the silence. The girl joyfully announced her return. Madame chuckled, praised Leslie for her good work, asked if the girl was satisfied with the ride in the prisoner wagon. Our heroine laughed merrily. She boasted that everything was done perfectly. She advised not to worry. After all, the lady knew her skills. A well-groomed hand with manicured fingers extended a folded sheet of paper to the girl, offered her to take it. Lacey wondered if it was a bonus, but what she saw shocked her. It was a leaflet with her picture on it. The girl was put on the wanted list. Our heroine was furious. She was shaking with indignation. Madame reported that Leslie had stabbed her in the back with a knife. Her father, the Earl of Hillstyle. The girl clapped her hands, thus trying to attract attention to herself. She asked to concentrate. Some might think that Lacey did something wrong. Perhaps she ruined the Count's plans by getting too into character. The answer is an absolute no. As the Count had wished, the first prince showed his talents, rising higher and higher. As planned in advance, her adopted father passed the baton to another bride. The girl jumped up on the spot. She continued her reasoning. Having finished her work, the villain Veronica had to disappear without a trace. The girl laughed, clapped her hands, spun around, ta-dam! A perfect happy ending. Here it is, the perfect scam. The Count would save his reputation thanks to the prince's bride, and Lacey would earn money and get rid of the debt. After that, the girl would go to a place where no one knew about her acting, and she would enjoy life. It was supposed to be a story with a happy ending. The girl crumpled the paper, threw it on the floor. She did everything as the Count ordered. The work for 5 years was done perfectly. So what was the problem? Madame smoked her pipe. She confirmed that the girl had done everything perfectly. This was what had caused the concern. The Count simply could not let her go. The brunette screamed. She didn't understand how the madam could say such a thing. The woman admitted that the man had offered her a double reward if she gave up Lacey. The girl was angry. She asked about her debt. Did the Count really do this to avoid paying for the work done? Madame folded her arms across her chest. She knew what was happening was unfortunate. But in this case, Lacey needed to save her life. The woman sent her ward to the port. She confessed that she had found a ship for her. The blonde girl left the madam's house. The lady confessed that Lacey was her favorite child, and she gave her the earrings that now sparkled in the girl's ears. Madame said that someday the brunette would have to be punished for her failed mission. But for now, she had to save her life. Everything had to be done in a hurry, but the girl managed to disguise herself. And all thanks to Madame, however. The bandits were already chasing Lacey. The men were demanding 10 million gold from her. They were mocking her. They were offering to die and give a gift to their families. The girl was outraged. Damn Fiorians, she knew that Madame's children were always like that. Lacey ran quickly down the street. Footsteps echoed in the night. People shouted about her acting talent. They asked about her wealth. They demanded that she surrender. Our heroine was outraged. She was amazed. Did they have no conscience at all? The fucking Earl of Hillsteel used a man and threw him away like that. The girl ran into the port area. She was thinking about the Count. Did the nobleman really believe that his plan would have worked without her? A male voice was heard behind her. They asked why she was so stupid. After all, she had nowhere to run. They suggested that she surrender. Below, in front of the girl, the sea was raging. They laughed at her. Didn't she understand what she was doing wrong? She did everything too perfectly. And because of that, the client became worried. Lacey was confused. The freedom she wanted so much was in her hands. She couldn't just give up. Suddenly there was a loud roar. It was thunder. One of the robbers ordered the girl to surrender. Suddenly it started raining heavily. Heavy drops fell on the port area. The wind picked up. No one could understand why this happened. Lacey took a few steps forward and jumped into the raging waters. There was a loud splash. They chased her, shouting that she was crazy. They lamented that because of the heavy rain they would not be able to find her body. But the bandits were not going to give up. After all, the girl was worth 10 million gold. The bandits did not believe that Lacey was really dead. The girl, now blonde, groaned. She was holding on with all her might. She dreamed that her stubborn pursuers would go away. Our heroine noticed that the rain had almost stopped. But still, Lacey was lucky, even though she had lost all her things. However, the girl got rid of the Fiore children using a single suitcase. Consider that she bought her life for nothing. Lacey slowly but resolutely climbed up the side of the ship, grabbing onto everything that came to hand. One more effort and the girl reached her goal. Just in time. The girl's fingers grabbed the wooden railing of the ship. Lacey exhaled heavily. It seemed she had found the ship Madame had told her about. But the main thing, of course, was not to get caught. The girl climbed over the railing. Her hands clutched the carved balusters. The ship rocked on the waves. Her gaze fell on a man. The sailor's cry echoed across the deck. The sea wind picked up his voice. The waves crashed against the side of the ship. The alarm echoed off the water. There was a commotion on the ship. The sailors were running from side to side. They were shouting that they had to find her. The girl hid in one of the cabins. She spied on the runners through a narrow crack. She prayed in a whisper that they would pass by. The room was spacious. Quietly, Lacey began to back away. Suddenly, her elbow hit something soft. A male voice asked if the girl was a night guest or a stowaway. He touched the beauty's light locks. She froze in fear. Slowly, the girl turned her head and came across the naked torso of a tall, muscular man. She asked who this guy was. Fast forward 2 years. The ancient castle stood among the spreading trees. The red tiles sparkled in the sunlight. The Count of Hillsteel sat in a chair and read a newspaper. He informed Veronica that a delegation from the Iran Empire would soon arrive. The girl needed to be ready. The maid was tightening the corset on the girl's figure. The man said that the brunette would need to take care of Prince Khalid. He was the representative of the delegation. When the outfit was finished, the girl came up from behind and hugged the Count around the neck. She asked if he was really grumbling at his perfect daughter again. When the maids bowed and left the room, the girl spoke. In Veronica's opinion, her father worried too much. She noticed that the Count had incredibly high standards. But had the girl ever disappointed him? The man decided that he needed to clarify. The gray-haired nobleman, in his usual didactic manner, informed him that he needed a good relationship with Prince Khalid. Veronica smiled and flattered the Count. She knew it was to bring things from the West. She mentioned her father as the best manager in Weldon. The man's brows furrowed. He noted that his daughter was smart, but she should not let her guard down. Because Prince Khalid was a difficult opponent, the hall was shining with luxury of decoration. Guests in exquisite clothes filled the space. They were surprised that the ship seemed to be covered with gold. They discussed that the foreign delegation numbered more than 100 people. They admired Irina's unheard-of treasures. They assessed the famous prince. Many noble ladies paid attention to the young titled man. They looked at his face and body. They were incredibly delighted by his beauty. Prince Iran froze in a regal pose. His muscular body radiated strength. Golden bracelets sparkled on his strong male arms. His appearance captivated everyone. The women looked at the blonde man with delight. Their tender cheeks turned red with pleasure and anticipation. Some of their faces showed embarrassed smiles. Veronica glanced sideways at the prince. Her thoughts were confident. The task seemed simple. She knew her goal. The girl closed her fan with a soft click. She confidently suggested to her father that he leave it to her. She could take care of everything. Suddenly, Veronica heard the prince say something about a dog. There was a noise in the room. The girl asked the prince what he wanted to say. The blonde looked down at our heroine. He said that the girl was wagging her tail like a dog. These memories flashed through Lacey's mind in an instant. She wondered why Khalid was where she was. She should have looked around. The prince turned to the girl. He noticed that they hadn't seen each other for a long time and called her by name. The blonde made excuses. She pretended not to understand what was being said. The man advised her not to pretend. He asked her what she had forgotten on his ship. So that's it. The girl realized that she was on the ship of Khalid, the crown prince of the Iran Empire. The man was hovering over the girl, pressing her with powerful energy. The blonde shuddered. How could it have happened that she had boarded the wrong ship? The prince pressed for an answer. He asked again what the girl was doing on his ship. Lacey realized that the situation was a little dangerous. There was noise outside the cabin. They asked if the girl had been in that room. Lacey listened to the conversation and froze. The next moment, the blonde resolutely grabbed her interlocutor by the shoulders and pulled him towards her. No harm in trying. Something had to be done. Suddenly, a strong male hand grabbed her wrist and the blonde did not allow her to touch his neck. The girl was surprised by such behavior of the prince. She frowned. Damn it, had he noticed the paralyzing poison under her nails? He must have figured out her plan. The young adventurer was not going to give up. Clicking the heels of her shoes, she came closer to the man. She rose up on her toes. She closed her eyes and reached out to the prince for a kiss. He asked for it. The man continued to hold her hands, not allowing her to touch him. Everything happened suddenly. With a quiet sound, they both fell onto the soft bed. The man crushed the blonde with his body. The front door creaked. A servant with a monocle in his eye peered into the room. He addressed His Highness. He wanted to warn. The visitor shuddered at what he saw. In the room, his prince and an unknown young lady were kissing passionately. Their bodies were intertwined in a hot embrace. Lacey didn't lose her head. She kept kissing the prince. She wondered why everything had turned out this way. Why it all seemed so natural to her. A handsome man with a bare chest leaned over Lacey, his hands gently touching her hair. The sheer curtains of the canopy created a semblance of privacy. Simon jerked back. He closed the door with a loud bang. He stuttered a little and said that he was glad when he saw that His Highness was safe. One of the accompanying men looked at Simon and asked when they planned to sail. If what the patrolman saw is true, then we need to leave right now. Meeting a mutant is a unique case for Weldon. Simon blushed. No. The man decided that the report could wait. Such a momentous event. He whispered that finally His Highness. The man did not have time to finish his thought. The door swung open. The prince appeared in the doorway. He turned to Simon. The servant with the monocle bowed politely. Khalid ordered the search to be stopped. Nothing strange had happened. He ordered the departure to be hastened. He gave Simon full power. The blonde returned to the room. He grinned, looking at the girl. He said that it would be better if she hit him on the back of the head, not on the face. The girl cowered, hugging her knees. Her wary gaze was fixed on the prince. He said that anyone looking at her would think she had been taken advantage of. Khalid Sirim Hartman, Prince of the Iron Empire, heard in response that it was so. The young man who had come to the Weldon Kingdom to trade rubbed the back of his head. Our heroine realized that she couldn't do anything in this state. She decided that it would be better for her to try to evoke sympathy for herself. The girl began to whine. She admitted that she had mixed up the ship. She suggested that if the man pretended not to know and closed his eyes, she would be able to leave quickly. With a smirk, the prince asked if that was all she wanted to say. The girl's mouth dropped open at this statement. She didn't understand what he meant. Khalid Sirim laughed and asked again if she had really boarded the wrong ship by mistake. The paper rustled in his hands. The girl found herself in front of a wanted poster. The prince asked if she was the stowaway hiding from the police. Lacey covered herself with her hands from what she saw. How could this be? Would everyone recognize her now? The prince smiled, looked at the blonde and said that Veronica Hillsteel did not need to deceive him. Lacey looked at the man in surprise. The titled gentleman said that they knew each other quite well. Their first meeting was hard to forget. In a crowded hall, amidst the hubbub and noise, Prince Khalid accused the girl of wagging her tail like a dog. Veronica was angry. She asked what dog she was talking about. When did it wag its tail at him? At that moment, the first prince turned his head in surprise. He froze with a glass in his hands and watched what was happening from afar. Veronica never deviated from the plan. She waved her fingers, noting the first prince's gaze. She didn't want Khalid to anger her. The girl was perplexed and looked intently at the young man. The prince of the Iran Empire asked for forgiveness. He admitted that he still did not know their language well. The blonde pretended to think about it. With a serious expression on his face, he asked if it would be correct to say not a dog, but a puppy. Veronica smiled tensely. She said that the prince had an excellent vocabulary. They wouldn't even need a translator. The girl resolutely approached the man and said that Prince Khalid should have been more perceptive. The first prince quickly approached the couple. He called on Lady Veronica to stop. The girl did not pay attention to the future monarch. She tried to prove to Khalid that he was wrong if he thought she was trying to get his attention. The man was unperturbed. The girl's voice wavered. The two froze in a tense standoff. Neither wanted to give in. Each was convinced that they were right. A pretty lady hurried up to the couple. She noticed that there was a misunderstanding between them. Fortunately, she was able to save the situation by stopping Veronica's delirium. After some time, both princes shook hands. The negotiations were successfully concluded. There was a conversation in the count's castle. The man was saying that everything had turned out even better. He recommended that Veronica continue to treat Khalid as an enemy. If the prince of the Iran Empire were to give his preference to another young lady, it would be an ideal outcome. Veronica thought about it, decided that it would be even better this way. The first impression wasn't very good anyway. After that, she would be like a fish in water. At the next ball, the girl informed Khalid that a barbarian dressed in gold was still a barbarian. Veronica noted the inappropriateness of his appearance. The prince appeared almost naked. Did he really like such indecent things? Now the girl tried not to think about it. The young lady was in a panic. If only she knew that they would meet again. The man noticed her silence. He didn't remember Veronica Hillsdale acting like this before. The prince touched the sparkling earrings in the girl's ears. Now the magic should disappear. He squeezed the jewelry and there was a cracking sound. The earrings were a difficult-to-use and find magical item. All that remains now is just a thing. The girl had no choice but to play Veronica using her real appearance. But Lacey couldn't figure out who the prince really was. It was very strange. She tried to hide, but... The man took the girl by the chin. Our heroine was perplexed. How did the prince know that she was Veronica? And that the earring was magical? How could he guess so easily? The blonde looked at the girl intently. He asked her to answer his question. He asked who she was, a night thief or a criminal on the run. The girl laughed merrily. She looked up at the man and replied that it was one of two things. The prince casually threw the silk robe over his body. He noticed that Veronica was devoted to her master. Devoted, like a dog. The girl froze in confusion. There was incomprehension in her gaze. She looked confused by what was happening. The blonde frowned. He looked intently at his interlocutor. He said clearly, "Daniel Laifin Veterane." Our heroine was at a loss. She coughed and turned away from Prince Khalid. She could not understand why he had spoken the name of the first prince. Veronica reflected that in any case it was beneficial for the prince. The girl chuckled. The one with a bounty on her head boarded this ship. Could it be because of the first prince? The soft steps of a man were heard nearby. He said that because of her service to Daniel, the girl threw herself into the fires of hell. The pretender thought. She looked down. She was perplexed. It was all pointless. The prince approached the girl. He leaned over and continued that she not only threw herself into the fires of hell, but she also fled the country. The young adventurer smiled cheerfully. She was pleased that she had played her role so well. The girl said that the prince was mistaken. She had acted only in her own interests. And now she was just going to place a bet. The prince brushed her words aside. He saw through the pretense and decided not to listen to her excuses any longer. Her game was exposed. The man twirled the glass in his hands. There was a splash. He wondered what was ultimately more fun, a night thief, a stowaway, or a loyal dog. The guest asked if she was a famous villain. She suggested that the prince choose the right role, and she would play it. The young gentleman chuckled. He sipped his glass. He didn't believe it. He wondered if all this was really a game. If so, then why did the girl throw herself at Daniel's neck? Was that also just a game? The interlocutor admitted that of course she did, but she could not say who had entrusted her with this. She took the offered glass from the prince's hands. The blonde was surprised. He asked again if all this was really only on the client's instructions. Lacey sipped her wine. The girl suspected that the prince was trying to entice her, but she admitted out loud that only if the payment was decent. The man repeated about payment. He abruptly emptied the contents of the glass and put the glass on the table with a loud sound. He began to tell that in the west of the Iran Empire there was a territory called Sureb. There in the middle of the desert there was a beautiful city, and there was a room filled with gold, silver, and with sapphires with rubies. The girl could choose any. Lacey was taken aback. She asked if the prince had hired her. She wanted to know who she was supposed to play. The prince admitted that the girl played the villain well. He asked if she could play the bride, the servant with whom he fell in love at first sight. The man took the girl by the chin and lifted it so that her eyes looked at him. He smiled. The prince hoped that her performance would be convincing to everyone. Khalid Sarim suggested an alternative. If the interlocutor didn't like it, then she could be a free rider. The brunette watched silently. The prince moved closer, leaned in, told her that if she had trouble choosing it was okay. She could try to run away again. The young gentleman covered the girl's hand with his own. He admitted that he quite liked her method. The man showed how the guest should embrace him by the neck. He brought his face closer and asked if she should kiss him. The prince whispered directly into the girl's lips, asking if she was going to refuse. After all, the guest said that she could play any role. Their hearts were beating so loudly that it seemed their beats could be heard throughout the ship. Lacey smiled charmingly. She accepted the challenge. The girl lowered her eyes and said that she was ready to play the proposed role. The prince held her hand. Without blinking, he looked into her eyes. He pressed his hot lips to her fingers and said that if she had made such a decision, then they would leave immediately. On the ship, everyone immediately started moving and running. Orders were heard on the deck. Everyone was ready to sail. They were returning to Iran. Their departure seemed rather sudden. Simon explained that there was no reason to delay, because His Highness had found what he had been looking for so long. One of the sailors smiled, admitted that it was all true. Their goal in Weldon had been achieved. The ship slowly moved away from the pier. The dark silhouettes of the ships dissolved in the night darkness. The lights of the port gradually disappeared over the horizon. Simon asked the red-haired interlocutor if he was sad. After all, his sister had never been found. He denied it. Since there was no news, she wasn't even in Weldon. Moreover, they were sure that their trip had been fun. Both men laughed heartily. The monocle-wearing interlocutor admitted that there was something else. It turned out that Rana Khan had caught a spy. The redhead was amazed. Could it be that a secret agent had followed them from Arena itself? Simon confirmed his suspicions, explaining their hasty return. He stated that the spy had tried to seduce His Highness. His interlocutor was taken aback. Could it be that the girl had tried to use her beauty? Simon objected. Didn't he know the character of His Highness? It wasn't the best move. The prince didn't even look at women. The ship glided across the turquoise surface of the sea. The multicolored sails were filled with the wind. The sun's rays played on the waves, creating a sparkling path. Lacey thought about it. Everything around was very suspicious and raised many questions. The suspicions grew stronger. The girl sat at a luxurious table. The exquisite dishes beckoned. Thoughts about the unsigned contract and the prince's excessive hospitality caused concern. The girl studied the food in front of her with distrust. She hoped that there was no poison in the treats. She pierced the fragrant piece of perfectly cooked meat with her fork. Thought she'd try a little. She chewed a piece. It was delicious. The girl knew she had to control herself. She wondered why the prince hadn't sailed away, as if he was waiting for her to come on board. Was there any other reason to leave the kingdom so quickly without saying goodbye? I wondered why the diplomats were so disrespectful. Fork in hand, Lacey wondered about the prince's attitude. Could all this really be resolved so easily? The front door clicked. The prince entered the room. He smiled when he saw the girl at the table. He admitted that he did not know whether she would like the treat. Our heroine grinned and closed her eyes in pleasure. It was worth eating. The brunette offered Prince Khalid to eat together. She had something to tell him. The young master was surprised. He wondered what she wanted to tell him. The girl admitted that she would be straightforward with him. She needed the truth before signing the contract. What he was hiding and what his intentions were. The blonde grinned. What could he hide? The man took the cup in his hands. He said that he had no hidden intentions. He continued that this was only a small part of his intentions. After these words, the girl tensed up. Red wine flowed in a thin stream into a golden goblet. The girl watched, fascinated, as the glass filled. Prince Khalid looked at the girl intently and admitted that his goal from the very beginning was the brunette. Lacey was surprised by such an answer. The blonde took a sip of wine. He said he hadn't intended to sail away so quickly, but what he had been aiming for had come to him. He took a sip of the intoxicating drink with pleasure. He asked if there was any need for further hesitation. The girl was taken aback by such a statement. She reached for the knife that was lying nearby. She wondered if the prince had really been dealing with actors from the very beginning. The blonde man silently expressed his incomprehension. The girl chuckled, admitting that he should have told her about it earlier. She raised her glass sharply. She realized the reason why the prince had immediately recognized Veronica and treated her without hostility. The girl emptied her glass in one gulp. She realized that the man had entrusted her with knowledge without even testing her abilities. The brunette slammed her glass down on the table. She also realized the reason for the ship's immediate departure. For Lacey, everything now fell into place. All Khalid wanted was the same actress who would play the badass Veronica. The girl reproached the prince. She accused him of recognizing her from the very beginning. Did the man really wait, wanting to hear a confession from her lips? The young gentleman was surprised. He looked closely at his interlocutor and asked how he could recognize her. Lacey clenched her fist. She insisted that the man knew for sure, because he had figured out about the poison and the magic item very quickly. The brunette sniffled. Among Fiore's children, she was the only one who had received a magical item from Madame. It was a secret that only they knew, Lacey and Madame. The cruel truth pierced her consciousness. Madame had sold her. The girl guessed that everything happened because she could no longer be used in Weldon. Lacey hid a sharp knife behind her back and asked her interlocutor if she really played so well. The girl lowered her head. She was upset. She thought that Madame was protecting her. The prince watched the guest closely. The brunette looked sadly at the prince. She asked how much the man had spent on her. He said that he had offered as much as was needed. Lacey smiled sadly. She said that it was probably even more. After all, the prince was damn rich, so there was nothing surprising about it. The girl remembered that she had gone to the port much earlier than the appointed time. But the Fior guys were waiting for her there, and just as she had a good feeling, she was immediately driven into a corner. The girl slammed her fist on the table. The blonde cleared his throat and said that it seemed to him that the atmosphere had changed slightly. The girl screamed angrily. Did the prince really think that it was just the atmosphere that had changed? The man confirmed her words. The brunette froze. She had been deceived. The deception cut sharper than a knife. The blonde chuckled, remembering their normal communication before. The girl was indignant, and he hadn't confessed yet. The man assumed that she might be mistaken. Lacey jumped up from her seat. The girl was sure that it would be easy for her to control this man. She moved closer to the prince with determination. A veteran like her should be able to see right through people. Lacey pulled the prince towards her and captured his lips. The blonde man flinched. The girl continued kissing the young gentleman. She watched his behavior. She noticed that he had a different reaction now. Prince Khalid pulled the young adventurer to him. He grabbed her head. He kissed her back. Lacey was pleased. He had an excellent animal sixth sense. The brunette continued to analyze. The prince did not disdain active actions, and it seemed he did not think of giving away the main role. A rumble was heard somewhere. The young gentleman put his arm around the girl's waist and pulled her closer to him. It was clear that he was interested in Lacey as a woman. One thing she didn't understand was why she felt so good with this man. The girl was melting in his arms. The brunette understood that one way or another the prince wanted her, and she decided that then she would use him too. They broke their embrace. The man asked what it was. He asked if he had imagined it or if the girl wanted to say something. Lacey pulled away. She replied coldly that she didn't want anything. She did it to get off the subject. The blonde hid his chuckle behind a cough. The girl suggested talking about the contract, mentally reasoning that now was not the time to give in to emotions. The prince was taken aback. It seemed he did not understand what contract was being discussed. The brunette reminded him that she was talking about hiring. The client's honesty was important to her. Lacey turned around, dark curls sliding down her back. She told him that the prince should not forget that they were in the same boat now. The prince sat relaxed in the warm water of the spacious bath. The mention of the contract made him shudder. He confirmed with displeasure. Simon was against it. It wasn't work. What kind of contract could it be? He asked if they hadn't planned to rule Sareb and protect Iran together. Khalid's right-hand man, Simon el-Saha, wanted to know if the prince planned to let the girl go at the end of the contract. The young gentleman scratched his head. He admitted that everything was possible. The assistant asked what would happen if she heard. The prince said that he knew for sure that the girl did not know a Western language. Simon looked around and looked around. There was a splash. The young gentleman came out of the bath. He admitted that it was necessary. He reached for a white towel. He wrapped it around his waist. He said he hired her to play. Whatever role she is assigned, she gets into it flawlessly, just like she did with the role of Veronica Hillstay. Simon was puzzled. What kind of work was this? His master approached him. Drops of water were dripping from his naked torso. The assistant cleared his throat. He asked if that was why the girl wanted to sign a contract with the prince. The blonde pulled his hood over his damp hair. He admitted that he couldn't recognize the real her. That's why he decided to do it. Simon was puzzled. The prince said that it suited his purpose anyway. The assistant spoke wistfully about where it suited. The blonde chuckled, said he liked his assistant's sincerity, asked if he had said that before. Simon insisted that it would be better to tell the girl everything. The man specified that sincerity was important at such a time. He gave instructions to come up with a solution. The prince said that every time he opened his mouth to tell her, he was stopped by the prohibition. He did not understand how he could tell her. But 10 years ago they already met, and then they made a promise to each other. Lacey paced the room nervously, muttering quietly as she did so, wondering if she had done everything right. Our heroine thought about Iran's empire. Only at that moment did the girl realize that it was too far away. The anchor fell into the water with a crash. The ship shuddered, slowing down. Waves crashed against the sides, creating foamy spray. The door opened abruptly. The room was empty. The man realized that the sea was quite rough, so getting there and back was not easy. The order was given to search everywhere. The first prince shouted that they must find her. The count watched what was happening from behind a tree. He understood that in Weldon, even risking his life, it would be difficult to get to Irene. The gray-haired man was angry. How dare the girl disappear without his permission? At Madame's house, a veiled woman informed a visitor that the actors had not been accepting requests for some time. The lady in the formal dress was upset. She said she was very sorry. Madame did not allow the visitor to be discouraged. A magic earring flashed in her ear. In return, Madame recommended. A man in a hat was watching their conversation. The wide brim made it impossible to see his face. Lacey twisted around inside her room. The girl was glad that no one would be able to find her. This was her #1 refuge. The brunette looked around. Her gaze stopped on the bed under the transparent canopy. She thought, why the bride? Looking at the bed, the girl remembered what she had done with Khalid. She laughed with satisfaction and began waving her hands. Lacey stopped suddenly. Out of nowhere, she was going to have to get married. She wasn't quite sure what those circumstances were. In the bathhouse, Simon continued his conversation with His Highness. He asked what would happen if he explained everything to the girl in 3 days. The prince lowered his head. He admitted that it was all useless, because in 3 days they would reach the border and the ban would disappear. The blonde knew he had to figure it out. But if he talked about the past, the girl would think he was conducting a secret investigation and would hate him. The young gentleman thought and stared at one point. The man understood that she didn't even remember him. Simon was puzzled. What would they do then when the contract's expiration date approached? The prince remained silent. Unexpectedly, the young master confessed that he had to lure her before that time. His assistant did not understand what his master had to do. The prince was very serious. He said that it was necessary to convince the girl to stay with him. Simon did not understand how His Highness was going to do this. The young gentleman was worried, but he considered his worries unnecessary. The assistant looked around in all directions. He asked how the prince was going to win the girl's heart. Suddenly, the blond man raised his head and said that Simon should come up with it. The man with the monocle was surprised and asked again what the prince meant. The young gentleman waved his hand. He said that after all it was his assistant's job. Or he didn't agree. The prince poured himself and his interlocutor some water from a jug. Simon admitted that it was hard for him. After all, the man knew little about it. Khalid Sirim Hartman glanced sideways at his assistant. It was the first time he had seen him like this. The prince asked Simon if he thought he should wear clothes, or if the girl preferred him to be naked. The assistant winced, thinking that even if the girl seemed to like the bold, she might prefer the modest. His grumbling was interrupted by the prince. Simon cried out. He asked if His Highness was all right or if he had been possessed by a water spirit. He warned that if he hurried, the girl might get scared. The blonde thought about it. He asked again if his assistant was sure of this. Simon said with an offended voice that he was not sure. The prince wondered why his assistant was at a loss when he said something he was not sure of. Simon stuttered and asked for forgiveness. His Highness wanted to understand what they had decided about the clothes, in order to eventually lure the girl. Simon asked to stop. The prince lost his temper. He accused his assistant of always contradicting him. He should be doing his job. Simon was shocked. He never neglected his work. The blonde thought about the girl. He knew she had gone through hard times. He wanted to erase them. The assistant insisted that the future was more important. The young master thought that even if the girl forgot the promise, even if she couldn't remember, he would be by her side no matter what. The man looked at his hands, smiled. He was sure that time was on his side. The prince decided that from that moment on the brunette should live well. Clothes, jewelry, whatever she wanted. She was his bride. The dim light of the lanterns illuminated the wooden walls of the ship's hold. A heavy door with a bolt separated the prisoner from freedom. In a dark corner of the ship's prison sat a prisoner. Shackles bound his legs. The man believed that time was on his side. They would try to use the prince's weakness to penetrate his heart. A red-haired man entered Lacey's cabin. He smiled affably. The girl asked if he had come to guard her. In response, she received confirmation. The brunette was genuinely happy. He had come just in time. She needed to do some preliminary research. With a smile, she asked if she could ask her interlocutor a couple of questions. The man replied that he was ready to answer all her questions honestly. The girl showed interest in the position of women in arena, comparing it with Weldon. The man explained. Their couple consulted about what surname to choose in marriage. He admitted that it was not uncommon for a woman to become the head of the family in their empire. Lacey chuckled in surprise. She noticed the differences. I asked whether the crown prince's wife would be entrusted with public affairs. The interlocutor could not answer this question. Lacey continued asking. She wanted to know if the crown prince's wife would be involved in diplomatic work. The redhead didn't know the answer again. The girl laughed. She reminded the man of what he had said at the beginning, that the girl could ask whatever she wanted. The interlocutor blushed in response. The cabin was striking in its luxurious decor. Purple curtains framed the tall windows. Carved patterns decorated the wooden walls. Lacey dozed off on the cozy bed under the chiffon canopy. She tossed and turned in her sleep. Quiet sobs broke the silence. Her whispers were full of fear and despair. The girl suddenly woke up from the nightmare. She jumped up and sat up. She breathed a sigh of relief. It all turned out to be just a dream. Suddenly there was a knock. The girl started. She came up and creaked the door open. She asked why the man had just knocked. Prince Khalid entered the cabin. He was dressed only in a loincloth. His muscular torso remained bare. Lacey sat at a massive table. The blonde looked at the girl closely. He asked if she had been waiting for him. The girl waved her hand and asked him to come over. The negotiations needed to be finished. Lacey handed the man a copy of the contract. She asked if the prince would check it. With a quiet rustling sound, the young gentleman took the document from her hands. Prince Khalid pretended to be carefully studying the documents, but he wondered if the girl was at all embarrassed that he had just come out of the bath. The brunette watched the man closely. She didn't understand why he was so serious. She hoped that Arena had contracts. The prince read out one of the clauses of the agreement. It said that parties A and B agreed to the following. First, the parties assumed obligations, conscientiously play the role of lovers at first sight. Secondly, Party A must protect B from being exposed in the Weldon Kingdom. Thirdly, Party A must not only provide the necessary information to Party B, but must also provide support. Fourth, upon successful completion, Party A will pay Party B a reward equivalent to 10 million gold in the Weldon Kingdom. Cash or written statement. Fifth, after completing the task. After these words, the prince frowned. His voice wavered. The man read that Party A should no longer look for Party B. Sixth, the term of the contract. The prince did not finish. The girl interrupted him with a question. She specified that the term had to be exact, and she asked how long she would be his bride. The blonde wanted to know why there was nothing in the contract about what would happen if the girl failed. Lacey was indignant at this question. She was sure that she could not fail. The man was not satisfied with this answer. The brunette agreed to clarify this point, but she thought that she had tried in every way to skip it. The prince emphasized point 7. If the task fails, then Party A can ask Party B for anything as compensation. The man thought for a moment. That's it. He slapped the contract with his hand. He pushed the document towards the girl. If the contract was long-term, the girl hoped it would be no more than 2 years. She didn't want to get stabbed in the back, like in the situation with Veronica. The prince thought about it. He asked again that the girl must be very tired of long contracts. Lacey thought that if it lasted more than 2 years, it might raise suspicion. The man didn't understand why she thought that. The man blushed and was shocked by what he heard. The girl replied that they would not have children. The prince coughed. Lacey asked what was wrong with him. Khalid continued coughing. He waved his hand at the girl. He calmed her down. He replied that nothing terrible had happened to him. Lacey, of course, realized that once she got married, even by contract, she couldn't avoid it. As she spoke, the man continued to cough. The brunette pointed her finger at the contract. She said that it would be nice if there was a contraceptive. The man covered his mouth with his hand. She admitted that she could never have unprotected relationships. The prince was silent. The girl asked if Her Highness had listened to what she was saying. Suddenly, the man picked her up. The contract was signed. He asked her if now that they were together, they could do everything couples did. The girl denied it. She said that the prince needed to sign the document. But the man said that she could do whatever she wanted with the contract. He lowered the girl onto the bed under the chiffon canopy. He hovered over her and declared that instead he would do whatever he wanted in bed. Lacey was lying on the bed. The prince was sitting next to her. He was gently stroking the strands of her hair. He smiled. They hadn't even started yet, and the girl had already fallen asleep. His bride muttered something in her sleep. She asked him to stop. The man pulled the blanket over her. He understood that the girl was very tired. The prince leaned over and gently touched the girl's hair. He wished her to rest and sleep a little. On the deck of the ship, Rana Khan begged the prince's right hand to let her meet the crown prince's wife. She cried loudly. Simon groaned. He refused the girl. He asked again how many times he would repeat it to her. But the border guard did not calm down. She wanted to know why she was refused. The brother begged the girl to stop, but she screamed and was hysterical. Insisted that she wanted to see her too. She wanted to receive her favor too. Those watching this scene were not surprised. Rana Khan was the best at catching mutants. She fought in the attack on Sureb. Therefore, the prince trusted her. The woman stretched and remarked that she too would like to meet the prince's bride. Her interlocutor replied that there had already been those who had received her favor. The red-haired guard's sister was dragged away by 2 sailors. She screamed and begged for permission. The brother apologized for the girl. Simon was not angry. The guard admitted that they were born into poverty and sought favor through service. They watched their behavior and apologized for the trouble they caused. Simon patted his interlocutor on the shoulder, said that the prince had personally promoted him, and asked that the man not be too harsh on his sister. Lacey was sitting on the huge bed. She was looking at the richly furnished cabin. The prince asked if the girl had had a good bath in the imperial bath. The brunette smiled sincerely. Her cheeks turned pink. She thanked the prince. She admitted that it refreshed her very much. Even the poison from under her nails was washed away. The prince looked at the girl closely. She revealed that she had enjoyed it, especially after everything she had been through. The man stuttered and muttered that he was glad that the girl felt better. Lacey remembered that the maids were acting strangely. They did not speak the common language and the girl could not understand them. The brunette was lying relaxed in a small pool, and the maids were taking care of her. They were massaging her body. The girl was getting real pleasure. I thought, isn't this paradise? I noticed that the maids were very caring. They were talking about something among themselves. They were looking closely at the brunette and whispering. Lacey lay relaxed at the edge of the pool. She didn't understand a word the maids were saying. One of the maids admitted that she found the girl very beautiful. She liked her. The brunette thanked her for the compliment. The serving girls began talking among themselves again. They were discussing the crown prince's bride. Lacey thought about it. She had appeared so suddenly. It might have aroused suspicion, but all the maids had been so kind to her. The prince was surprised. He chuckled. Was that really why the girl felt uncomfortable? He had promised that Lacey would not want for anything. Our heroine frowned. Then she exhaled and admitted that she didn't mean that. She meant that everything was happening too fast. The man came closer and asked a question. Now that the girl had taken a bath, could he apologize? Lacey asked him what he meant. The gentleman leaned over the girl. The fabric of the robe rustled. The prince admitted that he wanted to apologize for last night. They hadn't finished something yesterday. Lacey started to refuse. She blushed and was embarrassed. She said that she had told him yesterday that she was not ready yet. But the prince insisted that the girl was already ready. He began to gently touch her wrist with his lips. He decided that the preparation was over. Lacey's eyes widened in surprise. She stared at the prince. The girl did not understand what was happening at that moment. The girl asked the prince to stop. She asked if they were the only two in the room. The man continued to gently touch his bride's body. The prince leaned over and whispered in her ear how much longer he had to wait. Lacey chuckled, thought, gasped, asked her to wait. Was serious. Suddenly the brunette shuddered. She pointed somewhere with her finger and asked what was there. The prince turned around. He saw the striped tail and understood what was being talked about. The man asked if the girl had seen Tara for the first time. Lacey looked at the prince in surprise. The beautiful animal looked at them without blinking. Unlike Weldon, Irene still had magic. Every citizen of Irene had abilities. When the abilities were perfected, it was possible to make images. They protected and were called Teru. Abroad, the prince could not show Tara to anyone. He reassured the girl. Cheppy would not harm her. There was no need to worry. He suggested finishing what they had started. The prince wanted it very much. He looked at Lacey. The girl was embarrassed. The blonde asked if she wanted it. Our heroine's heart began to beat wildly. It seemed that she did not want to. But it was not so. The stranger's hands were so gentle, and the kisses were so nice. But the girl knew there was one problem. She could only close her eyes and play the lover. Lacey's eyes widened. She couldn't have sex because she didn't know how. The girl remembered the instructions she had once heard in Madame's house. Their mission was to play. They were actors. To play for real, you need to put your soul into it. And that's hard. The woman asked me to remember that. The face of the person watching them was hidden behind the wide brim of his hat. Madame warned them that their hearts could be broken. But they must not let it happen. Lacey sensed danger. She pushed the prince away from her. The blonde asked what had happened. There was surprise in his eyes. The brunette screamed that she had already said earlier, no unprotected relations. The prince gently hugged the girl. He said that he had prepared everything. A pair of bracelets on the girl's hands jingled. The interlocutor said that even if the girl wore only one, they would not be able to conceive children. The man was confused. The girl put on 3 bracelets and said she was going to the bathroom. That's why he thought it was preparation for intimacy. Lacey was embarrassed. Now she realized why the maids were looking at her like that. The bracelets on her wrists sparkled. She remembered the girls squealing with joy. They claimed it was perfect. Lacey lowered her head. If that was what perfect was about, then she couldn't even dream of the bracelets being magical contraceptive items. Now she knew about it. The prince lifted his bride into his arms. The silk fabric of the robe rustled. The girl screamed in surprise. The man carried his bride to bed. The brunette began to push him away again. She claimed that she was not ready. Her face turned red from the effort. The prince did not react to his interlocutor's words. He asked if she was not ready now. Would she be ready on the bed? The girl's heart pounded in her chest, echoing in the silence of the room. Lacey realized that she needed to add one more clause to the contract. She insisted that there should be no unprovoked sexual relations. The prince, taken by surprise, put Lacey on the floor. He asked what she meant by unprovoked. The brunette looked at the prince. They were only playing an inseparable couple. She said that they didn't need to be a couple for real. That was obvious. The blonde man shuddered. He folded his arms across his chest. He exhaled sharply. He agreed with the girl if that's what she wanted so much. Lacey quickly took the contract and finished writing the necessary clause. The prince silently watched the girl. She extended her hand with the document to the man. She asked him to sign. Suddenly, the girl remembered something. She asked the prince to choose a name for her. The blonde did not understand what name she had in mind. Lacey explained. She wouldn't sign her name as Veronica. The prince admitted that he thought the girl would use her real name. The brunette froze in surprise. She said that this name was kept secret. It was the only thing that protected her. The prince began to pronounce her name. But he changed his mind. He smiled slyly and said the name Nereid, in honor of the nymph who lives in the sea. The brunette was surprised. Her heart pounded loudly in her chest. The prince asked if she didn't like the name. Lacey looked at her interlocutor intently. She was embarrassed by his smile. The girl understood that she did not know the prince at all. The quiet scratch of a pen broke the silence of the room as the girl wrote her new name on the contract. Nereid. It sounded good. The dim light of the lantern under the ceiling of the prison barely dispelled the thick darkness. The light cast shadows on the cold walls. The guard assured that everything was calm. The loud roar of His Highness's pet was heard somewhere nearby. The guard admitted that Cheppy had frightened the prisoner greatly. The man with the monocle asked what if magic had been used. The guard bowed, apologized. He had not considered that option. They approached the wooden grating. It was necessary to find out what signs of magic there were. The guard made excuses. It all happened so quickly. The chains clanked dully in the darkness. The creature lying in the cell shuddered. The heavy footsteps of the men echoed off the walls. Simon was distressed. The entire reputation of the guards had collapsed. The lock clanked. The opening grate creaked. The guard promised to interrogate the prisoner. To make her talk. Simon agreed. Said that everything would be over when they returned. Would they really take away her magic? The chains dug into her pale skin. The woman looked like a witch. Her tangled hair hid her face, twisted with rage. The guard smiled grimly. He judged that such a punishment was worse than death. The key turned in the lock, making a soft click. Simon asked how Ranahan was feeling. The red-haired man admitted that his sister had been active. Another guard came out of the cell. Both men turned to him. The guard bowed and said that he thought the prisoner had lost her mind. She also beat him up when he left. Simon understood where the man got his bruises from. The prince's right hand ordered to strengthen the guard, since they would soon approach the border. The prisoner watched the people leaving. The air was stale. The shackles clanked. The prisoner grabbed the bars, squeezed them. Soon the room was empty. Simon bowed low. He greeted the prince's bride. He admitted that he felt embarrassed that he had not greeted her earlier. Lacey smiled. She replied that everything was fine. After all, they had already met. Simon remembered how he had burst into the cabin where the prince was kissing the girl. The man winced. Lacey admitted that she was grateful one way or another, and she hoped that Simon would continue to help. The prince's right hand was grateful to the prince's bride for her mercy. He was very nervous. He promised that he would never let her down, that he would try. The prince called out to his servant. He grabbed his head. He grinned. He ordered him to do what was asked. The servant responded with consent. The girl admitted that she had begun to sleep poorly because she was feeling unwell. Simon bowed low and asked permission to examine her. The girl allowed it. The man with the monocle began to look into her eyes, pulling her eyelids. The girl was confused. She wondered what he was looking at. Simon said it was not an illness. However, he was worried about how the girl was enduring the journey. She was very weak. The brunette looked at Khalid. She wondered why no one had told her that Simon was a doctor. The prince folded his arms across his chest, said that the girl needed to eat more, asked if there were any other recommendations. Simon said that everything was fine. The prince was pleased. Lacey noticed that Simon was quite a talented man and close to Khalid. If she got along with him, he could be useful to her. His Highness ordered to take care of the girl, and he needed to look at the map. Simon bowed in response. The blonde turned sharply and ordered his right hand not to say anything stupid. The assistant froze in place from these words. The girl continued to ask what else the prince had told his right hand. Simon told that the prince would become the new ruler of Sareb. The lady would become the empress of the Iran Empire. The girl wondered if that was all. The man confessed that he had heard that they had a prince who loved him at first sight, that the girl did not know their language well. She loved red wine. And they were also told to make a good menu because the girl loved to eat. This information surprised the girl greatly. Simon was about to consider the taste and nutritional value. Lacey interrupted him. She winced. What were they going to feed her? The man admitted that he understood that this information was not enough to serve her. He wanted to know if he had made a mistake. Lacey was surprised. To be honest, she didn't quite understand why there were no questions for her. Simon explained that the sailor who saw her board the ship did not remember her face. Moreover, most did not know the common language. The girl understood that no one knew what had happened in Weldon. Simon meant the wanted posters. The brunette realized that the servant knew Veronica. Besides, he had a better command of the common language than Khalid. So the man with the monocle understood perfectly well what the villain Veronica was talking about. Lacey wondered if the man really wasn't interested in who she was. Simon confirmed with a bow. And if the girl doubted it, he was ready to prove it in practice. Lacey agreed. Thanked him for the story. Said that she wanted to count on Simon in the future. Suddenly the man staggered. The girl became worried. She asked what had happened to him. Simon's heart pounded loudly in his chest. The man replied that it was nothing. He asked if there was anything else he could do to help the brunette. Lacey pointed to the bracelets on her arm. The jewelry sparkled. The girl asked if all the people in Iran wore these. Simon replied that no. Only Prince Khalid wore such bracelets on the ship. This precious object was made especially for her. Lacey asked if Prince Khalid treasured his bracelet. Simon answered in the affirmative. The girl wondered. If the prince wore a pair, did that mean he used the bracelets with others? Lacey continued to talk about the bracelets. Simon raised his finger and said that he was ready to tell the girl about their prince. The heir was from the Imperial Hardman family, ruling Iran, the most influential heir to the throne. The prince is very smart and talented in battle. He is talented in everything. Simon emphasized that the prince's appearance is unique. Girls constantly fell in love with him. Lacey agreed with this statement. However, Simon revealed that the prince had never had a relationship. None at all. No fiancé, no mistress. The prince's assistant admired his master. The prince didn't even have a girlfriend. The brunette asked, did he really not have a partner? If he didn't have a girlfriend, then maybe he had a man. Simon continued. He admitted that he didn't know his prince at all. Lacey nodded in agreement. She had heard so many good things about him. But there was a strange feeling. Simon shuddered. The brunette wondered how everyone reacted to the prince so abruptly declaring someone his bride. They probably had doubts. Simon smiled. He said that everyone was just surprised, but no one doubted his choice. Lacey wondered why that happened. The assistant was sure that it was because someone had managed to steal His Highness's heart, which was unshakable. Simon looked around, lowered his voice, admitted that because of the ban he could not tell about the prince's abilities. He confided his belief that everyone fell in love with His Highness as soon as they looked into his eyes. The door opened abruptly. The prince quickly entered the cabin. He noticed that these two were not wasting their time. They quickly got along. He looked at his assistant carefully. He said that if Simon had finished, he could go now. Lacey decided that the prince had lost his temper and decided to save his reputation. Khalid pushed his assistant towards the exit. Simon wished him a good rest. The brunette laughed. She thought the prince was calm, but the tension of the people in front of him was growing all the time. The door closed with a soft bang. The gentleman wondered if they had had a good conversation. Lacey admitted that the prince had interrupted them at the most interesting part. The man noticed that the girl needed information about the role. That's why he let them talk. However, he warned her that she should keep her distance. Lacey looked at her interlocutor intently. She wondered if he was jealous. The blonde was indignant. How could he be jealous of his servant? The girl wondered what had happened. Why had Khalid left so abruptly? The prince sat down on the soft ottoman. He replied that nothing had happened. The prisoner tried to escape. She tried to break the cell, made a mess, injured several guards. The prince hoped that all the wounded would be cured. The red-haired man was shaking. Khalid asked what the purpose of the escape was. The guard said that the prisoner wanted to kill the prince. The blonde knew it. The prisoner was tied hand and foot. How could she pull this off? Perhaps she had an accomplice. The redhead asked if it was necessary to take her. Insisted on an immediate trial. The prince objected that he did not understand. She had to be taken. He patted the guard on the shoulder and promised that they would judge the prisoner as soon as they arrived in Irene. The guard looked at his master sadly. He admitted that he had probably overreacted. He asked him to forgive him. Lacey was surprised. And that's what he called no big deal. The prince smiled, nodded his head, said he'd made the right decision, so everything was fine. The young gentleman came closer to the girl. He pointed his finger at the sheets of paper. He noted that the girl showed enthusiasm. Lacey took the documents in her hands. She told him that Simon had given her some very useful information. The prince said that this is not his only talent. Lacey noted that her freedom is quite difficult for her. She needs to work hard. A smile appeared on her face. Perhaps the client would want to sincerely thank her for her efforts. The girl hoped that the prince had not forgotten his promise. Starting from support, the prince promised that he would not skimp on anything. She came closer. The man immediately asked what the girl wanted. Lacey thought, what did she want? Blood pounded in her temples. The girl turned away from the prince. She wanted freedom. Lacey always wanted to be free. But when she is free, what will she do without debt? In a place where echoes of the past will not overtake her. She wanted to go there. The girl was lost in her dreams. The prince's sharp shout brought her out of her thoughtful state. The blonde asked if the girl had heard him. Our heroine gritted her teeth. She told herself not to be sentimental. What could she hope for? The prince wanted to call her by her real name. Lacey faked a smile and turned to the man. She said to just give her money. Money would be enough for her. The men talked on the deck of the ship. The prince's assistant noted that Lacey had unusual abilities. Their princess was not an ordinary person. Simon noted the unusual color of the girl's eyes. Purple was considered the color of luck. The girl's kind words complimented her abilities. That was his opinion. The guard was curious about how much hidden power the prince's bride had. He was eagerly awaiting their ship to cross the border. Simon admitted that the girl had only greeted him, but he was already close to tears from her grace. The interlocutor did not believe it. Could he really cry? As Simon had thought, Khalid's intentions were correct. Now the patrolman understood why the prince had said that they absolutely had to be in Weldon. According to Simon, the girl could reach the level of a high priest. The interlocutor was surprised. Was there really such a great power hidden in her? The man with the monocle thought. The power was not just great, but no one knew how pure it was. Simon interrupted his thoughts. He noticed that he had taken up too much of the guard's time, and he sent him to go round the ship. The man looked up at the sky. He hoped and worried that everything would be okay. Nothing was known. The sails flapped in the wind. The stars shone brightly on the dark velvet of the night sky. They boarded the ship only after receiving a sign from above. Simon stood on the deck of the ship. The wind ruffled his clothes. He whispered that when he explained everything to the girl, it should calm her down. There was a rustling sound nearby. The assistant was lost in his thoughts and did not notice the prince. He shuddered. The blonde apologized that his dreams had become real. He felt like he had ruined everything. Khalid remembered a recent conversation with Lacey. She had closed herself off from him and said that she only wanted money. She insisted that there would be enough money. Was it really all the girl needed except material support? The answer was yes. The prince did not like this atmosphere. The girl said coldly that she would work as long as she received money. The young ruler did not want her to say that. Khalid looked at his interlocutor intently. He admitted that it was in his power to give the girl everything she wanted. Lacey turned away from the prince abruptly. She reminded him that she only wanted money, and insisted that the man simply give it to her. Simon was shocked by his master's story. He recalled that the prince was heading towards the girl with the intention of seducing her. The blonde did not understand how this happened. The prince's right hand thought. It seemed that everything had become even more complicated. The ruler scratched his head nervously. He reasoned that all this was quite complicated. Lacey sat on the edge of the bed. Myriads of stars twinkled in the night sky. A cool breeze blew through the open window. Our heroine always wanted freedom, but the girl never thought about what would happen after, because she was so used to living in captivity. Suddenly, a snow-white bird flew into the open stained glass window. For a moment, Lacey remembered the one who extended her hand of freedom, the one who looked at her with such warmth, as if his gaze reflected everything tender in this world, who affectionately called her by name. The white bird landed trustingly in the girl's outstretched palms. Lacey froze and thought. The contract said nothing about love. The magic bird flapped its wings loudly and flew away. The brunette thought that the man did not need it. In his hands lay the lost feather. Suddenly, a loud roar was heard. The girl turned sharply. She looked around. The huge animal stretched, opening its mouth. Lacey screamed, jumped on the bed. The prince's pet was very big. The girl had seen him several times, but she hadn't gotten used to him yet. It was very scary. The brunette was shaking with fear. She hid behind a large, soft pillow. She had no peace on this ship. She couldn't even be sad. There was a rustling sound. The tiger began to approach the girl on soft paws. Lacey screamed. She asked the animal not to move. She really wanted to run away. She didn't care at all whether it was Taru or something else, because the prince's pet looked like a predator. Bright rays of sunlight filtered through the heavy velvet curtains, filling the room with a warm glow. Lacey was incredibly happy to be alive. The prince entered the cabin. He was surprised to see the girl hiding behind a pillow on a large canopy bed. He asked what she was doing there. He approached the girl. He asked about her intention to become friends. Lacey flared up. Why did the prince come only now? Why did he leave her alone with the beast? The prince chuckled. It was good that the man was full of energy, but the girl did not want to lie down and die. She asked Khalid to do something. The prince looked at his pet. He waved his hand. The huge animal understood everything without words. Soft steps were heard, and soon the striped tail disappeared through the door. The prince admitted that he actually had an offer. The girl exhaled. She asked what the offer was. Had she really found another job? The blonde fell to his knees in front of the girl. He said that the proposal would be included in the brunette's current role. He gently took the brunette by the hands and looked intently into her eyes. He said that they needed to ask for a blessing together. Lacey was amazed. Was it really necessary to ask for a blessing for a wedding? She asked what she should do. The prince admired his bride. He did not take his admiring gaze off her. He smiled and admitted that she did not need to do anything. He needed the girl to just be near him. This was quite enough for the prince. The jewels sparkled dazzlingly in the bright light. The maids circled around Lacey, each doing her own task, preparing the girl for the important event. The brunette suspected that they were superstitious, but she couldn't even imagine that they were that superstitious. And all for the sake of a blessing ceremony. What else could she say? The prince said that they would soon reach the border of Irene. If they did not perform the ceremony and ask the blessing of the ruler of the sea, they might be out of luck. The young gentleman said that they might have been lost in the storm or run aground. All this time, Lacey hid in the cabin to avoid the sailor's eyes. She was worried whether everything would be okay. Although the journey went quite smoothly, there were quiet steps. The prince entered the room. The blonde sincerely admired the girl. He noticed that all the preparations were going well. The prince watched as the maids fussed around the brunette. He asked if the girl was nervous. Lacey admitted that she had reason to worry, because Khalid said she wouldn't have to do anything. The man laughed. He confirmed that everything was correct. But the ruler slowly approached his bride, gently touched her hair. The girl blushed. Could the man really be doing all this right in front of numerous maids? The prince leaned towards the girl. She closed her eyes and gasped. The blood rushed to her face. The man reached his hands to the girl's neck and adjusted the necklace. The girl was a little disappointed. She expected something completely different. The prince reported that everyone was nervous when they met the Lord of the Sea. The girl, stuttering a little, agreed with this statement. The man casually said that they could see each other later. And he left the room. The door slammed. The girl froze. She wondered what she had expected. She ordered herself not to think about useless things. She needed to play her role. Lacey turned around and saw the maid's close attention to her. Our heroine smiled sincerely. She radiated joy. She suggested that the maids continue their work. The men walked down the corridor. The prince announced that his bride would also join the ceremony. Simon asked if His Highness was sure that his decision was correct. Wouldn't the girl be shocked by this? The blonde glanced sideways at his assistant. He said that sometimes it was necessary to experience it. The full moon reigned in the endless night sky. Its light penetrated through the sparse clouds. A scattering of bright stars spread across the entire sky. In the silence of the night, the measured tapping of heels on the wooden deck of the ship could be heard. The fabric of the dress quietly rustled in time with the girl's steps. Delicate earrings shimmered in the dim light. A half mask covered the lower half of Lacey's face, leaving only dark strands of hair visible. The girl knew it was time for her to go out. Lacey froze for a moment in front of the open door. Her heart was pounding furiously. She was truly dazzling. Her black hair flowed like silk. Her eyes shone with a mysterious sparkle from under her veil. Her dress emphasized her grace. Lacey was glad for the fresh air. How she had missed it. The girl spread her arms out to the sides, enjoying every breath of the sea breeze. Suddenly, a loud sound caught her attention. The girl turned around and asked what it was. A child approached the girl. He took the girl by the hand, pointing his finger forward. His gesture was insistent, demanding attention. The sound was repeated. The girl's eyes widened in surprise. She froze in place. The sound of worship echoed in the hall. Thousands of people bowed low before the girl. She towered over them like a ruler over her subjects. The brunette remembered how Simon had recently told her that none of the people on the ship had doubted the prince's choice regarding Lacey as his bride. The prince's assistant said that soon everyone would want to look at her, but no one would dare raise their heads. The silver light of the full moon outlined Lacey's silhouette on the ship's deck. The night breeze played with the long strands of her hair. Now it all became clear to her. The girl with green hair smiled and looked at the girl with admiration. The brunette glanced sideways at the child. She looked intently. Her steps echoed loudly in the silence. The people on deck did not say a word. The girl passed by the crowd watching her. The brunette was a little scared by all this. If she hadn't moved, would all these people have continued to bow? The girl approached the side of the ship. The wind continued to play with her long black curls. Suddenly a cape was thrown over her shoulders. The brunette turned around and saw a maid who was smiling, looking at her. Lacey thanked her for her care. The girl noted that despite the fact that the cape was thin, it was very warm. She touched the sparkling stone. Was it really a magical object? Lacey was covered in jewels. They were everywhere. She was angry. She wondered. It didn't matter that he was a prince. How many more of these things did he have? Lacey looked back. She thought that Prince Khalid had approached. She shuddered in surprise. Chepi sat down quietly next to her. He looked at the girl with intelligent eyes. The brunette got angry. She started screaming and accusing the animal of chasing her. Lacey wanted to know why the animal was looking at her like that. The girl was even a little shaky with anger. Suddenly the brunette froze. She realized that her behavior was wrong. She had to be the perfect bride for the prince. Lacey stood up straight, tried to calm down. She needed to be like this. The main thing was not to look at the prince's pet. The majestic tiger stood still next to the girl. The fabrics flowed in the wind. A translucent veil hid the features, giving the image a mysterious look. People started talking. Chepi approached first. He was friendly only with the crown prince. Now it became clear to everyone that the girl was really his fiancée. The brunette was swaying. She was terrified. She couldn't even guess why the animal was still near her. Suddenly, loud sounds were heard. The tiger turned his head and stared at something behind him. The girl also looked back. She wondered what had happened there. All the subjects fell to their knees again. They bowed their heads low. The girl was happy. She smiled. She said how the prince had appeared at the right time. The golden patterns on the black robe shone. The light hair framed the noble features of the face. The exquisite jewelry emphasized the royal origin. Lacey was genuinely happy. The prince had finally arrived. The people around her smiled. It seemed that the ceremony was about to begin. Those present admired their prince. It seemed to them that he himself resembled the ruler of the sea. The man and the girl found themselves facing each other. The full moon softly outlined their silhouettes. The prince extended his hand to the girl. Lacey placed her fingers into the man's outstretched palm. She noted that the prince's hand was warm. There was a murmuring around. They were talking about the girl being able to cope with something. Lacey didn't understand what they were talking about. The prince leaned towards the bride's ear. He honestly admitted that he thought he had made a mistake. But now he was glad that it was she. As the girl had claimed before, she was the better actor. Lacey was silent. This time, it wasn't an act on her part. The brunette turned sharply at the sound. Her eyes widened in surprise. Before her gaze appeared an innumerable number of jewels. She was surprised. Were they all taking this so seriously? Lacey couldn't believe her eyes. Where else would she see something like this? The servants kept carrying out more and more gold bars. Lacey watched with bated breath. Everyone was very serious. Lacey whispered because all this could not have been prepared in one day at sea. She asked what she needed to do. The prince looked at the girl intently. He reminded her of what he had said earlier. She should just stay close to him. Treasures were piled on the deck in glittering mountains. Gold coins, silverware, and precious stones gleaming in the silvery moonlight. Simon approached His Highness and held out the green palm branch he was holding in his hands. The man took the branch and looked down. Lacey was puzzled. The prince reassured the girl. He told her not to be afraid of anything. The brunette glanced around sharply. One of the maids was standing next to her. The girl smiled at her. Lacey thought, how can she not be scared and surprised here? She watched the girl surreptitiously. Wasn't she an unusual maid? The servant was very serious. Everyone was standing on the deck. Many were holding a green branch in their hands. Simon was standing at the stern and calling for someone to come. Lacey was surprised. The girl did not understand who they were calling. Who could it be? The wind mercilessly lashed the deck. The girl's fragile figure bent under its pressure while the prince remained motionless. Lacey gasped in fear and hid behind the prince. Was that really a tsunami? Her fragile figure was shaking. One of the sailors raised a seashell to his lips, and loud sounds poured out into the night darkness. The ship glided over the waves. Loud sounds from the seashell filled the air, filling the space around the ship with anxious anticipation. A warm, strong arm wrapped around Lacey's slender waist. The prince reminded her that he was with her. The brunette realized that this was a series of incomprehensible situations. But one thing was clear, that there was something under the water, and it was looking at them. The prince pulled the girl towards him sharply. Lacey noticed that the man was not at all agitated. Something huge floated under their ship. There was a loud sound. Lacey tried to cover her ears. Her whole body was shaking. Suddenly, everything became quiet. The prince kissed the girl on the forehead. He said that everything was now okay. Lacey looked around. There were girls standing around. They were holding palm branches, and they were all singing. The man and the girl stood frozen in a mysterious light. Lacey couldn't understand how the prince could be so calm, without a sword or armor. A green palm branch swayed in the night air. The prince broke the silence and invited the girl to open up. Lacey didn't understand what Khalid meant. His gaze frightened her. The man touched the girl's hand, insisted that she look carefully. She didn't know then. She thought that this ceremony was just a formality, another superstition. But the one she encountered during the ceremony, that day, it was strange. When she encountered a part of herself she didn't even know existed. Did she guess? Only after a long time did the girl understand. A roar was heard nearby. It was the prince's pet who had silently approached. A large sea dragon swam in the depths behind the ship. This creature knew Lacey better than she knew herself. Our heroine heard the prince's words. They had finally arrived in Irin. Welcome.